Okay, you guys, this is Conventional Energy Alternatives, the Environmental Issues and the Search for Solutions, Chapter 20. I'm excited to look at this and talk about it. So let's get started. So what we're going to do is talk about alternative energies to fossil fuels. We're going to talk about the contributions they make to the world. And then we're going to talk about nuclear energy, wind energy, biomass energy, tidal energy, stuff like that. But we're also going to discuss the debate around alternative energies and, moreover, nuclear energy. Okay, so back in the 80s, what happens is we see Sweden having an issue. One of the nuclear reactors leaks, has a problem, and they start a plan that they are going to phase out nuclear energy. I think it was like by 2010 or something like that. Anyhow, long story short, they got to like the year 2000, 2002, somewhere in there, and they're like, like 30% of our energy comes from nuclear power plants. And so they devised this plan that they were going to meet their requirements and become the leaders in renewable energies, whether it's hydroelectric, biomass, wind power, et cetera. And that was their goal. Now, they very much pushed societally for that climate change is an issue, and I think if you look and see, there's their country, their people are very big proponents for mitigating climate change, and so Greta Thunberg, she's from Sweden, but basically they do still have nuclear power because they were unable to fully cut off ties. Most of the nuclear power plants, this is kind of interesting, almost all the nuclear power plants really were built 1970, 1978, 9. There was a big push in there, and pretty much all of the nuclear power plants that are out there, their power plants are about 40 to 45 years old. And I think it's pretty interesting. What do we want to do? Well, the reality is we're searching for a way to break away from fossil fuels. And so if we look at our country in general, we are highly dependent on fossil fuels. 80% of our energy comes from oil, petroleum, fossil fuels, coal, natural gas. Natural gas is really a big one that's coming up because there's quite a bit of it in the United States and in Russia. We see a lot of push towards that. Coal, obviously, it has its issues, not just with climate change, but also with other emissions. And so it's a problem. But if we look at where we're at, oil and coal pretty much are our biggest producers of electricity or energy. Conventional alternatives, what are they doing? They're giving us less of an impact. There are benefits, there are drawbacks. But again, basically what we're dealing with is nuclear, hydroelectric, and biomass, and wind, I should say too, wind as well. So conventional alternatives. When we talk about biomass, biomass fuel wood, we do see energy, about 10% of the world's energy from there. Nuclear power still provides about 6.3%. And then hydroelectric power is only about 2.2. Solar power, wind power are coming on. There's a lot of subsidies that are given to them, and so I see a lot of gain in those areas. But if you think about hydroelectric and nuclear power, again, they count for about 1/6 of the world's electricity generation. And so with that being said, what are we doing? We're trying to get and break our dependence, our addiction to fossil fuels. And so if we can find ways to utilize the different conventional alternatives as a group, not just as a singleton, but as a group, it'll make a significant impact. And so one type of conventional alternative does not make it right for everywhere. So if we think about hydroelectric power or turbine power, you know, one size doesn't fit all. Arkansas has a lot of dams, and so they have a lot of hydroelectric power that powers most of their communities. We don't have a lot of dams in Illinois, and so I think it's one that depends on where you are, depends on what to do. We have wind energy. You don't see a lot of wind energy in Arkansas or Tennessee or Kentucky. You've got a lot of trees, you've got mountains, everything's in the way. Nuclear power, we're smack dab. Illinois has got more nuclear power plants than any other state. We have 13 of them. We are smack dab in the middle of them. We're 60 miles as the crows flies from the majority of them. And so if you think about the different nuclear power plants around us, obviously, depending on if there is a bad day, God forbid that should happen, you better hope that the wind's blowing in the right direction. And so the reality is this, there's some concern there and people have it, but with public safety concerns out the window, and to be completely transparent, Mr. Hackler and I went to LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant last summer, pre-COVID, so 2 summers ago. It would have been September anyway. And we went and toured LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant. In fact, the funny part is they kept Mr. Heckler's pants because he had tested positive for radiation on his pants. So they took his pants. It made for an awkward drive home, by the way. So here's what I think is interesting. When I was in 4th grade, toured LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant when it was put in before the nuclear reactors came online. And so we went from before to today, or this year, when I got to go again, some 45 years later. And I think it's pretty interesting. All of these power plants are about 45 years old. And we look at what we get from nuclear energy. In the United States, about 20%. Different countries, like France, receiving 78% of its power. Now, again, what are we doing? We're splitting an atom, in this case, uranium-235. We're splitting it, and what we're doing is we're collecting the energy that comes off of it. And so fission means to split. The sun has fusion. We're fusing 2 hydrogens into a helium. And so this is called a fission reactor, nuclear fission. We're splitting the atom. This blue color is exactly what it looks like. This is a nuclear reactor, fuel rods, and it causes the water to glow blue. This is exactly what LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant looks like when we were there. And again, it's a nuclear reactor. They have to fuel it every once in a while. Where do they get the fuel? They mine the uranium underground, and they put it into fuel rods. There is a what's called control rod, which goes into between the fuel rods. And what it does is they're able to control the amount of reaction by raising and lowering the fuel rods and then the control rods from each other. So the control rods block and absorb the neutrons that are causing the fission to take place. This is a great example of a nuclear reactor. Again, we are heating a control rods, reactor. These are the nuclear fuel. So what happens is the control rods slide up and down, blocking how much fission is taking place. It heats up a loop. This is the primary loop which heats up a water loop, which is the secondary loop. And what happens is that creates steam, turns a turbine. The turbine then causes a generator to create electricity. And then we have to cool that water or it will get too hot. And so we use either a cooling tower, or in the case of LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant, they use the lake. Clinton the same way. Gone skiing at Clinton and the water stays hot all year long. A breeder reactor basically takes U-238 and is using the waste product that comes out of it. It's very expensive. It's not a good technology. They use it, but it does make better use of the fuel and the spent fuel. We do not have any breeder reactors in the United States. In this case, the problem is we want nuclear fusion like the sun. We can't do that. We think we've done it once. There was an alarm that went on, a reaction that went off. They thought they did it. Nobody's done it. It's too hot. We've not been able to figure out how to fuse two hydrogens to make a helium, right, and get a neutron off of that. If we could, we would have unlimited supply of energy, which would be amazing. Interestingly enough, when nuclear power came along, it was theorized that we were going to have so much energy, the energy would be free, and you would pay a flat rate. Well, that never happened. they got our money anyway. Nuclear power is good at what it does, right? It delivers clean energy. There's no CO2 emissions. It is just producing energy. The drawback is that we have radioactive waste. And the reality is, if you look at the 436 operating nuclear power plants in 30 nations and the number of incidences that happened, Fukushima happened in Japan, where a tsunami shut down the reactor. It went on overdrive and it blew up. Or you can talk about Chernobyl, same way. Radioactive waste and accidents is a problem. And you have an aging infrastructure, right? So what are the drawbacks versus value to the difference between coal and nuclear? All right. Well, you got to mine coal. Somebody's got to do that. It's underground. Nuclear power, less expensive, right? All you got to do is get uranium. You make it into pellets. Again, they do this with surface mining. Not a big deal. Greenhouse gas emissions, right? Lots of emissions from coal. Zero from nuclear power. Pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, particulates, zero for nuclear. Radioactive emissions, well, there's none in coal, but there's a lot in nuclear if there's a problem, right? If there's an accident. But if there's no accident, no, except for Mr. Heckler's pants. Occupation hazards, right? Black lung disease. People get sick from mining coal. I would say that a nuclear power plant, they are very good at making sure that nobody is impacted. Residents, air pollution, obviously. If there is a breach or a breakdown, yeah. If not, nothing, right? Nuclear power, you're good until something catastrophic happens. Well, I can tell you this, sabotage. This is a big thing. Nuclear power plants are really, really secure. Why? Because they don't want some nut job to come in there and wreak havoc and either steal, make dirty bombs, or blow it up. Solid waste, we have waste generated from coal power plants. They get fly ash, a product called coke, different things like that. Not as much, but again, the radioactive waste is where the issue is. Fuel supplies, when I was a kid, they said fossil fuels would last maybe 100 years. Don't know where that's at, but nuclear power, depending on the way the nuclear power plants are, is the longevity of nuclear power. So there is some risks, obviously. 3 Mile Island, 3 Mile Island is shut down now. There is a hotel right over here, and there's, I'll have to show you the pictures of it, a hotel right over here, and a sign that said, this is the site of the 3 Mile Island disaster, etc. They had a escape of radiation into the atmosphere, and as a result, the people of this area were evacuated. This is the issue in the United States that is the most serious. Chernobyl, Fukushima, on a whole nother level. So I actually stayed in the hotel over here. There's actually a thing called nuclear tourism, where people go to the event places where nuclear issues happen, and they take pictures. Pretty weird, but I guess I was a part of that. Meltdown, when you drain the water from the reactor, the temperature rises. When it does, it gets to a catastrophic temperature. And then if it blows up, then all that radioactive debris, gas, et cetera, goes in the air. Chernobyl, by far the worst accident. Basically, this power plant in the Ukraine explodes. They cannot get it contained. It says it killed 31 people. Really, it killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Communities are still have been abandoned. What's interesting is the change in the environmental impact with organisms and how it's sped up evolution, because organisms, they get sick from radiation poisoning and they end up dying quickly. And so there's this advancement in the evolution of these organisms. It's pretty interesting. But anyhow, this is the Chernobyl sarcophagus, and why they call it a sarcophagus. They ended up having to encase the entire reactor. They never got it under control. And so they ended up encasing the whole thing in concrete in lead because they could not get to the reactor. People could only be in there for 90 seconds at a time in the beginning. And basically it was, a lot of people died trying to get control of it. The wind obviously was blowing. And so you have Chernobyl, which was right here, and we see radioactive fallout following the wind currents, right? So the wind blows in this direction. And so, but there was also radioactive debris or readings picked up in cattle, I believe, within North America. And they attributed to the nuclear fallout from Chernobyl. There have been smaller accidents, obviously, that have been out there, but here's the deal. Nuclear power plants can be as safe can be. It all depends on, what is happening, what the infrastructure looks like. Interestingly enough, again, terrorist attacks at LaSalle County Nuclear Power Plant. A lot of people go fishing there. They used to have a missile battery. So shortly after 9/11, we were building our house in 2002, and they still had a nuclear missile, or they still had a missile battery there. And I remember pulling up there with Peyton Cheek's dad, Mr. Cheek, and we pulled up there, and they focused this missile battery on my pickup truck. It was kind of scary, actually. So obviously nuclear waste is a problem, right? So this stuff has a half-life of 300 to 700,000 years, which in a global perspective is no big deal, right? In a human perspective, it's an issue. And so again, it's weird how it glows blue, but this is that containment area where that nuclear waste is being stored. Spent fuel rods have to go somewhere. They have to be cooled. And so the issue is what do we do? If we look at where our nuclear energy waste is going, they're just stacking it up. It's called a stockpile, and that's what's happening. And these casks of lead, steel, and concrete is the way that they store them right now. So they store it on site. If we look at our power plants and where things are, we have a lot of nuclear waste that's sitting at our nuclear power plants. This is a vulnerable thing when it comes to terrorism. And we here at Pontiac, we are close to all of the nuclear power plants in the state of Illinois. And so if you look, here's Pontiac, right? We're pretty much smack dab in the middle of them all. And we have more than any other state in the United States. Yucca Mountain is a pretty interesting thing. What they wanted to do is drill into this mountain and put the nuclear waste inside the mountain in this little trolley system, and then fill it with concrete and make it to where nobody could get to it. It was never approved, but it still comes up from time to time. And so basically what happens is you deliver the nuclear waste, it goes down to the mountain that they've got these tunnels, then they backfill the tunnels with concrete so nobody can get there. And so basically it's down in the middle of Yucca Mountain. They didn't allow it to happen because people were worried about groundwater contamination. They were talking about what will happen if an earthquake hits or sabotage or whatever. Well, the way it is, it's in granite. It could not reach the water table. In other words, the water table would not penetrate. But never say never. I mean, it just never happened. And so there was people who said, well, let's launch it into outer space and send it out. Well, the problem is if it gets the gravitation of the sun, it would just come back to us. And there's all sorts of different ideas out there. There's just nobody's got a good answer. So again, Yucca Mountain, talked about that already, but how do you get the stuff there? And so you have to ship it, whether it's by rail or truck or whatever. Not an easy thing. And again, what happens if you have an earthquake? What happens if water should seep in? There's all sorts of different concerns. None of it has been mitigated. So what we see happening is nuclear power is starting to fade. So as the nuclear power plants get old, they decommission them, and they're not building any new nuclear power plants. And so it just slowly is being pulled down. Do I think nuclear power in the United States will ever go away? I think they're looking at new innovative ways to make nuclear power, but again, just don't know what the future is, but they have to keep the infrastructure continually updated, and it takes a lot of money. Biomass. Biomass is taking a material such as wood, miscanthus, which is a grass, things like that, that are what we call carbon zero things, right? So carbon neutral. So it takes as much carbon out as it puts into the air. And so in order to have biomass, so you have to grow it. And so people are doing so, and unfortunately, they're not replacing it. And so we see this large amount of wood being used to make stuff like charcoal or used for cooking stoves or whatnot. And the reality is gathering fuel wood is good to a degree. I mean, we can become more efficient at what we have, but the problem is you got to have the replacement. And right now we have 1 billion people using wood from trees, and they're not replacing it. Biomass is a renewable thing if it's not over harvested. And I say that because it's not happening. It's not a renewable situation right now. People are cutting down trees. And I don't know if you guys remember the island of Tikopia and Easter Island comparison that we did first semester, where we talk about the two islands. And Easter Island, they used all their trees, they harvested all the trees to move the Moai, and basically they became a civilization that went away because they didn't have food, because all the trees were gone, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think about biomass strategies, we can do this in a way that is sustainable if we can use material that is easily renewed and burned, and it is a powerful thing. We see this happening in the ethanol industry, which is slowly taking kind of a backseat. But basically, ethanol is being produced by making corn liquor, and you make corn into ethanol and put it into fuel. The problem is that alcohol is a water-loving molecule, and so as a result, you have water that, if it sits very long, will get into your fuel, and it's what it is. Most vehicles run on the 10% mixture. You've got a number of them that are called flex fuel that run on E85. But anyhow, yeah, we've seen an increase. It's slowing down. Flex fuel, here's E85. You'll see it on your vehicle. Actually, my diesel pickup truck ran on biodiesel, which is made out of soybeans. I'll tell you about that later. And I used to make it out of kitchen grease, but I'll tell you about that later. Here's biodiesel. Okay, I'll tell you about it now. So my biodiesel, we used to make diesel fuel out of the kitchen grease in the kitchen, and you can do it. In fact, the diesel engine was made out by Rudolf Diesel in, I don't know, 1903, something like that. I don't know exactly. Anyhow, it was made to run on peanut oil. And so the reality is biodiesel is a pretty good thing, especially if you're reusing a product that was just normally thrown away. If we look about biopower, there is a lot of opportunities out there where we have waste product from the lumber industry or other industry that we could be using for something like this. Things like bamboo, things like miscanthus grass, which this guy has down here. This is really good for this, and especially areas where that are not used for other forms of crops, right? So it can work out pretty well. And I think what the majority of these things do is what's called co-firing, and so they introduce biomass while they're using a coal-fire power plant. I can tell you that there's a lot of opportunities for us to become more sustainable and more efficient by using materials such as the sawdust from old log mills and different areas like that are growing grasses that are not usable for anything else. Biomass energy, again, is a carbon neutral or no net carbon into the atmosphere. That's a big thing. There's also an opportunity for us to support rural communities because you can grow stuff there. So good stuff. Also, another idea is that there's not as much of the sulfur and nitrogen dioxides, right? Because it's not a fossil fuel. Right? But drawbacks, obviously, how do you grow them? How do you grow the crops? How do you get them harvested? Is it going to compete with food sources and food production? Is it something that's going to be sustainable? Are there organisms and ecosystems that are impacted as a result of this monoculture type idea? Again, you have to harvest it. So those are just kind of some drawbacks. Next one we're going to talk about is hydroelectric power. When I was a kid, My family lives in Arkansas. I lived in Bull Shoals and Flippin and Norfolk, where the hydroelectric power plants are. Growing up as a kid, we were always there was a picnic table at the top of the dam, and we go on dam picnics, and we'd always make jokes like, "Here's the dam tour guide." But what I'm talking about is hydroelectric power. A dam stops up a river or some body of water, creates a body of water using the potential energy of the water behind the dam, and then the water is pushed through to turn the turbine. Again, turning a turbine, whether it's air, wind, water, wave, nuclear power, we're turning a turbine to create energy. Same thing. Here's that power plant. Water then turns the turbine. Turbine generates electricity, and away you go. Problem is you got to have to maintain the dam. Problem is environmentally, you have now disrupted an entire ecosystem, which most would say during the Tennessee Valley Authority days, when they were putting dams in for hydroelectric power, a lot of those ecosystems have now changed forever, right? There are different types where you can have going from higher elevation to lower elevation. These are called micro hydro. Micro hydro, again, powering only one house or a community. This is kind of a cool idea. And a lot of people in areas where they have rivers like this are doing this. Our river would not work for this because we don't have enough flowage. Hydroelectric power, again, only about 2.2% of the world's energy is powered by hydroelectric power. At the same time, there's a lot of people who are now removing dams because of the impact to species. Hydroelectric power is clean. It is renewable. It is not something that produces any sort of emissions, and it is really, really high return on your investments. The reality is it's a energy source that is really good at what it does, but the problem is you do disrupt an ecosystem. Again, damming rivers. Who gets control of the water? That's another issue. Thermal pollution downstream. So water that comes out of the bottom of the dam is typically very cold. It's very cold, and so now you've got this cold water going down the river or whatever. Three Gorges Dam. This is the largest dam in the world, and if you think about what it means, basically you have control over an area by this dam and how much water goes down and how much doesn't. The Aswan Dam determines whether water will go down to other communities past that. Again, if you think about hydroelectric power, it's free energy after you've built the dam. A lot of communities, a lot of places are doing this. And so here's what I would like to say. We have a limited supply of fossil fuel. That's not a stretch. And we have to figure out how to diversify what we're doing to remove our dependence on fossil fuel, biomass, wood, pulp, miscanthus, corn. These are all ideas. Hydropower, hydroelectric power, solar power, wind power, wave power. These all have the opportunity or the ability to do these things. But the reality is this. All of them do have some ecological impact. All of them have some drawbacks to their positives, right? So it's figuring out which one works the best. So with that, we'll go ahead and stop. I just want to say thank you for being so awesome. I love what you guys do. You guys are my heroes. I'm very proud of the work that you do. Keep up the good work. Keep pushing through, and just no matter what, just remember the world is a better place because you're here. So with that, we'll talk to you soon.